New reaction to the third indictment for former President Donald Trump under President Biden's Justice Department. The latest round of charges are coming out of special counsel Jack Smith's investigation into the 2020 election and the January 6th attack on the Capitol. The former president now faces 4 new federal counts, including conspiracy to defraud the United States, conspiracy to obstruct official proceedings, obstruction of official proceedings, and conspiracy against the rights of the people. While we now know that Special Prosecutor Jack Smith's case against the former president, what is unclear is how the unprecedented set of accusations will hold up in court and the impact on the 2024 presidential race. Hello, everyone. This is Outnumbered. I'm Emily Compagno, here with my co-host Kaylee McEnany, and also joining us today, the story anchor and executive editor Martha McCallum, television host and author Kim Douglas, and Fox News contributor and professor of medicine at NYU Langone Medical Center, Dr. Mark Siegel. But first, let's go to David Spunt, who is live at the Justice Department with the very latest. David, good morning.
Hi, Emily. Tomorrow we're going to find out a lot more about this entire case. Late afternoon in Washington, D.C., the former president will make his first appearance before a judge. It will be a formality. We'll see what happens inside the courtroom there. But today he posted just hours ago on his platform, Truth Social, thanking everyone. He said, quote, "Thank you to everyone. I have never had so much support on anything before." Now, special counsel Jack Smith says this case is plain and simple and gets to the heart of American democracy. And he points to the attack on the U.S. Capitol in January 2021. Listen.
It was fueled by lies. Lies by the defendant, targeted at obstructing a bedrock function of the U.S. government, the nation's process of collecting, counting, and certifying the results of the presidential election.
According to the indictment, Trump used knowingly false claims of election fraud to get state legislators and election officials to subvert the legitimate election results and change electoral votes. He allegedly organized fraudulent slates of electors in 7 targeted states: Arizona, Georgia, Michigan, Nevada, New Mexico, Pennsylvania, and Wisconsin. Smith says Trump attempted to use the power and authority of the DOJ to conduct sham election crime investigations and to send a letter to the targeted states that falsely claimed that the Justice Department had identified a significant concerns that may have impacted the election outcome. The indictment also claims that Trump attempted to enlist the vice president to use his ceremonial role at the January 6th certification proceeding to fraudulently alter the election results.
It's really an astounding document because for the first time in American history, a former president is being prosecuted by a political opponent who wields the power of the criminal justice system for what he believed in and the policies and the political speech that he carried out as president.
Emily, there are 6 unindicted and unnamed co-conspirators. One of them could potentially be attorney John Eastman. The reason we say so, his attorney confirms to Fox News that he believes that he is one of the co-conspirators. The other 5 are unnamed. All 6 are unindicted at this point. Emily.
David Spunt, excellent reporting as always. Thank you. And we will come back to you as all developments arise. Now, as the charges pile on former President Trump and Hunter Biden gets his so-called sweetheart deal from the Biden Department of Justice, many Americans are wondering if their justice system is two-tiered. Mark Meredith is live from Rehoboth Beach, Delaware, where President Biden is currently taking his week-long summer vacation. Mark.
Emily, good afternoon. He sure is. So far, the White House has not yet publicly weighed in on the latest developments that David was just talking about involving former President Trump. Reporters shouted some questions today at the president, but he chose to just keep on riding. Cameras capturing the president on his bike. He's been out there pretty much every day getting a little bit of exercise, but has yet to talk about what's been going on back in Washington with the special counsel. Republicans are speaking out plenty, though, accusing the Biden administration under the Justice Department to targeting political opponents.
We're also been investigating, the DOJ and the FBI and the weaponization of the DOJ and the FBI. And more and more, if they continue to act in this fashion, it just proves our point that, unfortunately, these 2 agencies, these 2 institutions have been weaponized by the Biden administration.
Republicans say they remain concerned, if not outright outraged, over how the Justice Department's handling a criminal investigation into first son Hunter Biden. Last month, a Trump-appointed federal judge in Delaware rejected a plea deal which would have given Hunter broad immunity in exchange for admitting to failing to pay taxes and lying on a gun application. Meantime, we are awaiting a transcript of an interview Congress conducted on Monday with a former business associate of Hunter Biden. Devin Archer reportedly telling lawmakers that then Vice President Biden did speak with Hunter's business associates on the phone on multiple occasions. That would be a direct contradiction from what both candidate and President Biden has said in the past. House Republicans are considering opening an impeachment inquiry against President Biden, but the White House says that would be just a waste of lawmakers' time. It writes, instead of continuing to waste time and resources on this evidence-free wild goose chase, House Republicans should drop these stunts and work with the president on the issues that actually impact Americans' daily lives. We don't know what kind of impact politically any impeachment inquiry would have on the president or his approval ratings. But, Emily, there was a New York Times poll that came out just yesterday that showed him tied with former President Trump in a hypothetical matchup ahead of next year's election.
Mark
Emily.
Meredith, thank you so much. We're going to bring it back to the couch now for discussion. Martha, there's so much that has happened in the last 24 hours. What's your analysis?
Well, I think it's interesting to kind of take a step back from these indictments. This is the third one. It's the second federal indictment. Obviously, this is a very serious issue. But it also reminds me that when we talked to Jonathan Turley and Andy McCarthy and the legal specialists over the course of all of this, they always felt that this one actually would be very difficult to prove. There's nothing in this indictment that goes to the issue of incitement. They are very broad in terms of the accusations that are made here for conspiracy and obstruction. And I think it's a big question about whether or not we'll hold up. And we can talk about the judge in a little while. But one of the other things that I think is really at issue here is the issue of presidential powers. What does the president have the right to do? What does he have the right to say? So you're looking into statements that the president said, he was being convinced by his attorneys. And obviously he was listening to the attorneys that he wanted to listen to because other people were telling him the exact opposite. But is there a crime here is the question. And one of the fascinating things to me is that there have been so much legal peril and legal activity around all of this, that what you find voters doing, 71% of Republican voters say that they think that they need to stick by President Trump. It's feeding into his strength. People, and because of the two-tiered justice system that Mark Meredith was just reporting on, I think that people have become somewhat inured to all of this. They throw their hands up and say, look, let's have an election in 2024 and let the people decide. So I don't think that politically this changes the game all that much. We'll watch what plays out. But as the Wall Street Journal said this morning, the coming months are going to be full of courtrooms and rallies in a carnival-like atmosphere, and they say that it could be difficult and dangerous, and I think they're right.
Kelly, what do you
Yeah, Andy McCarthy, Jonathan Turley, great legal minds have talked about the infirmities of this indictment and what it would mean for free speech. Some questions that come to mind. What would it mean? What would it have meant in 2000 when Gore beat Bush? That's what they said. That's what Democrats were saying. We know the reverse was true. 2004, when they were told Bush stole the election, that's what the left was saying. Hillary Clinton called President Trump an illegitimate president. 2020, the Hunter laptop was Russian disinformation. If this indictment held, if a conviction was secured, what precedent, applying that retroactively, would have been set in those various circumstances? I think it's a troubling precedent indeed. But broadening this out, I think it's important to look at what the American people see here when they look at Trump and Biden. And I'm talking pure political optics. You look at President Trump, you see a guy with a 53.4% Real Clear Politics approval, or I should say that is what he's garnering among Republican voters at this point in time. So for all intents and purposes, he looks like he's going on to be the nominee unless there's a big shakeup or polling changes. So they see this individual who's on his way there. They go back to last Wednesday where you covered the Hunter situation. The plea deal breaks apart. There's this hidden phrase in the diversion agreement, and a judge says this isn't fair. Fast forward to yesterday, Tuesday, and you see a second indictment against a former sitting president. You compare that to Biden. This is his DOJ. And look, he says the DOJ is independent. Let's take him at his word. But optically, what you see is a president at the beach, a president going to dinner in a movie, a president at an Oppenheimer film. And when he walks out, Politico Playbook says this. Meanwhile, the only public statement from President Biden last night was in response to a shouted question from the pool. It was compelling, he answered. The question was how he liked the movie Oppenheimer. So you see someone whose political opponent has been indicted as he enjoys dinner in a movie. And it is, at the end of the day, his Department of Justice.
That's right. And the timeline, again, just to underscore, so notable that every time the Hunter Biden situation and the corruption makes the headlines, an indictment seems to drop. June, July, August. Hey everyone, I'm Emily Compagno. Catch me and my co-hosts Harris Faulkner and Kaylee McEnany on Outnumbered every weekday at 12 p.m. Eastern, or set your DVR. Also, don't forget to subscribe to the Fox News YouTube page for daily highlights.